Hi, this is Annie Grace, and welcome to this Naked Mind podcast. Today, I have something that was super fun and special, and I think you'll enjoy. Basically, I was interviewed recently by an astrologer, and she wanted to really dig into the mythology of my life and who I am and why I do the things I do. And so it was fun. I went into parts of my story that I hadn't really shared, especially about my childhood, my upbringing, which I know people have tons of questions about because it was so random and alternative. And so I wanted to share it with you, and I thought this would be really fun to do. So enjoy this, and I hope you have a great day.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Stars Like Us. I am your host, Aliza Kelly, and I am so excited to introduce you guys to another Virgo. We love Virgos here. We love that mercurial energy. Her name is Annie Grace, and she is the author of This Naked Mind. It is so lovely to meet you. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. It's such a pleasure.
So, as I always do with these episodes when we introduce a new guest on the show, I love to learn and sort of understand your own personal mythology. Something that I think is really interesting that I had been sort of ruminating on a few days ago, but I don't think I had shared on this podcast is when we look at a birth chart in astrology, we're really looking at somebody's personal mythology. And that means that their story is embedded into it. So, unlike some of the other mystical practices that are very much of like, I see a lion, like, what does a lion represent for you? We actually kind of approach it with the through an inverted way, where we take what has actually happened to somebody in their story, and then we say, okay, this is how your real life is captured in the symbolism of your birth chart. So it really all goes back to the narrative and the story and the mythology. So Annie, what is your mythology? How did you come to be who you are today?
Oh, I love that. It's fascinating. So I had a really unique upbringing. I was actually born and raised in a tiny one-room cabin on the backside of a mountain at 10,500 feet without running water or electricity. And we actually had
Whoa.
to
Wait, so maybe we should go back a little bit more. How did that come to be? What's the story of your parents and how they ended up in a cabin?
So my dad was born and raised in the Bronx, Jewish, upbringing, and my mom was Cape Cod area outside of Massachusetts, and they both just kind of were drawn to Colorado, and they both kind of, I think my mom like cross country road tripped across the country, and then my dad ended up at DU getting a film degree, and he was doing internships in Manhattan during the summers, and right after he graduated, a friend of theirs said, "Hey, well, we have this cabin out in the mountains, so will you kind of house sit it for us for a few weeks?" And they left, and I think they went to like tour Europe or something. And my dad had, they're both very into like the hippie movement. It's in the 60s. And my dad went to the cabin and didn't leave, and they didn't come back. And so he's been there. I think it's close to 50 years now that he's been living in that cabin. It might even be
Is
over
he
50 years.
Do people still think he's house sitting?
He's fully, I don't even know that anybody would know that story. I mean, he's like a fixture. There's, half a dozen cabins in this area, and they're all a few miles apart. And you can't even get there by car. You have to snowmobile in the winter because it's just that remote. So it's dirt roads, all 4-wheel drive, and then they just close the roads. So when I was a baby, actually, they didn't have anything. My dad didn't want to own anything that had a motor. But then I was born, and he realized he needed to buy a chainsaw because otherwise, like the hand sawing enough firewood to keep a baby warm was just too much effort. And then the second thing they bought was a snowmobile because of the cross country skiing with a baby on your back was just too much. So they
Wow.
those things.
So your parents were not, it wasn't like this was the only life that they knew. It was that they basically had renounced what their own upbringings were in order to create this life.
Yeah, very intentionally. And I think both of them, like my mom was kind of raised in sort of a, traditional evangelical kind of Christian, and my dad was raised Jewish, and they both very traditionally kind of set that tradition aside and went to more or less just live, very alternative lifestyle in the middle of the mountains. And then they had kids.
And did they know how to do that? Did they know how to live like that? Was it intuitive for them?
I think it evolved. I think that, my mom has always had a super green thumb. She's still a landscaper to this day. So she does, flower gardens and whatnot. And they didn't eat meat, so they weren't hunting or anything, but they were growing food. And of course, they were still able to go to the grocery store. They just wouldn't go. They would try to like have spans of time where they wouldn't actually go into the town. It was, small town, Aspen, Colorado, which was a small town back then. It still is a small town, just a very swanky small town. But that's where they would go to the grocery store and whatnot. And so they'd leave. Um, but yeah, the chopping wood, getting water, they learned all that. And they're just very strong, fit, they're young. They still seem very young, even though they're not anymore. But
Okay, so regardless of, so they had their reasons for wanting to sort of like go off the grid and live this alternative lifestyle with none of the comforts of the modern world. But you didn't have a choice on that. You just came into this world and you're like, okay, cool, I guess I'm living off the grid. There's no option here. So that was where you were raised and that was how you grew up.
yeah, and it's funny because I have a great friend, and he and I had an opportunity to spend a few days together recently. And he's just a really brilliant man. And he was talking to me about this, and he's like, "But Annie, your childhood was so hard." And I'm like, "No, Myron, it wasn't hard. Like, I don't remember. I mean, it's all I knew. Of course, it wasn't hard. It was just normal." He's like, "No, but it was comparatively hard." And I was like, "No, I don't remember it being hard. I don't feel like it's hard." And he's like, "That's why nothing is hard, because you don't consider that hard. So then you come in." And I was like, "Oh, I see." Because for me, people would be like, "Wow, that's so amazing. That's so incredible. I can't believe it. How did you feel?" And I was like, "Well, I just felt normal. Like I didn't have any feelings about it really." And so, yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, my parents were very, very kind of trying to be very organic, very healthy. Interesting, which ties into my personal story, is they didn't drink alcohol. There wasn't alcohol in our house. There also wasn't sugar in our house. We had carob, not chocolate. We'd have honey and maple syrup. And so it was just kind of this very pure upbringing, lots of time outside, most of our time outside. Obviously, we didn't have a television for a long time. Eventually, when I was like 11 or 12, my dad got a solar panel where we could plug a TV in. And so we'd have like a few hours of TV a week when the solar panel charged. But it was really interesting. I didn't really know how different it was, of course, until I started going to school. And then people were like, "Wow, that's so different." My parents did a brilliant thing. They invited all of my classmates, because of course my graduating class was like 50 people. So it was a very small school. And they invited all our classmates up to go sledding and snowmobiling when I was really young. So although I was different, people thought it was very cool different instead of very weird different. And so that was really helpful.
You were even different within this tiny town.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. Nobody else was living in a log cabin in the mountains.
Got it. So that wasn't like what your peers were doing. Your peers also were like, wow, this is, you don't
Yeah,
have
and
a
I mean,
TV.
compound that with the fact that it was Aspen, Colorado. So, a lot of my peers were the kids of, quite famous movie stars, and there's just so much money. And so not only were they not living in cabins, they were living in, their second or
Mansions.
third massive house.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. What an interesting upbringing. Cool. So yes, that obviously is going to have leave a radical impression on who you are and what your internal resources are.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because it's something that I feel like other people can point out to me in a way that I really have no concept or scaffolding around. Because of course, when you're in the fishbowl, you can't see the water. I don't see it from a perspective of what's normal and not normal. I mean, I fully logically understand that was not a normal upbringing now, but it isn't. It doesn't feel. I can't relate. I mean, the only, I would say, lasting change that has happened, and this is really resolved now, because I'm 41 and I left the cabin to go to college at 18, 19. So it's been 20 some years, but I do remember early days in college just not having any clue what people were talking about when it came to television shows or movie stars or popular media. I was just totally out of it. I was became a big joke, and it was really funny, but it was always,
But weren't your peers in high school also, it was like the same kids, just in a different context. Were they, when you were in high school, were you not as exposed to kids, your peers, talking about like TV or whatever pop cultural things were going on?
yeah, a little bit, but I also think the high school was different itself. I mean, like the traditional thing that the popular girls wore would be like hiking boots and flannel shirts and no makeup. You actually got made fun of if you were wearing makeup. I mean,
Oh, okay.
it was such a it was a very outdoorsy culture. I mean, everybody was skiing all the time. We had part of our curriculum was these massive outdoor camping trips that we had to do where, went desert hiking without water, just a water pump for like a week, stuff like that.
Holy shit.
So it was very, the whole community, I would say, although it was Aspen, and of course Aspen has that whole swanky side, the locals, it was, it's where like the Aspen Institute is, and it's very outward bound, very focused on that stuff. So I don't think that anybody was watching a ton of TV. And then I think I just took it to another level.
Right,
sure.
right. So you left at 18, 19 to go to college.
Yeah. And, my journey from there, and really specifically in regards to what I do now in the book I wrote, was that I didn't drink a lot. I wasn't really, it was kind of like a take it or leave it thing, remember, a few parties ever. And then graduated college, met my husband in college. We went to CSU, and that was great. And then we both went to get our MBAs at CU Denver. And I was working as well. He was just doing a full-time program. And when he graduated with his program, he got a job offer at an investment bank in New York City. So my dad thought that was really funny that we were kind of going full circle from like the Bronx to the mountain back to New York. So we moved a week after getting married. We moved to Brooklyn, and we were both working in Manhattan. And I remember this is just kind of a funny thing, because by then my friends had totally introduced me to like Sex and the City. And so I'd been watching Sex and the City. I thought that was a great TV show. I was getting excited about moving to New York
Everyone
City.
is right. It is a great TV show. My favorite.
And so I go, and my new colleagues said, hey, we'll take you out, new girl, we'll take you out for a drink. So I was like, all right, great. So we went to this fancy, Midtown hotel bar. And I remember it was funny because like it was one of those places where you close the doors are glass, but then if you close them, they like fog up or something. So it was like one-way glass and on the bathroom. And so I was like, this is the weirdest place.
This sounds very like early aughts. This does not sound like something that would exist anymore.
Yeah, it was like they were all trying to outdo themselves with the weird bathrooms.
Yeah, this sounds like pre-recession move.
Yes, it was like 2005 for sure, pre-recession, especially because everybody had these big expense accounts too, where we could, everybody could buy lots of alcohol. So we went out though, and I didn't know what to order for a drink. So since I'd been watching so much Sex in the City, I obviously ordered a Cosmopolitan and got some very funny looks. You're like, okay, we don't really drink that, but sure.
That's so funny.
You go. That was awesome.
All right. Yeah, I love it. I mean, that's like, it really is like the living embodiment of like I realize that some of my favorite genres of movies are like fish out of water movies, like anything that like somebody comes from like one place and then like it does like wacky things in another just kills me. It cracks me up. And to that, I'm really trying to contain myself right now because I just want to be like lolzing all over. That is so good. Okay, so you ordered this Cosmopolitan.
So I ordered the Cosmopolitan. They gave me the weird looks. I was like, whatever. And then we got the bill, and they paid because it was my first day out. But I remember looking at the bill and being like, $25? That's ridiculous. And I just had this feeling of like, that is ridiculous. Who does that? And so I didn't just go out to the bar for probably the first 6-8 months I lived there. And then I ended up getting promoted. I ended up getting a different job. And one of my bosses, it was a company that was headquartered out of London. And so we'd have these higher ups coming in from the UK. And one of my bosses was like, hey, Annie, why aren't you showing up at the happy hour? And I was basically, well, I don't really drink. And he's like, oh, it's not about drinking. It's about the fact that that's, where your ideas are going to get heard by these executives. That's where your career is going to be built. Like, it's kind of like the golf course. Like,
and what industry were you in at this time?
So I was always in financial services marketing. So at first I was working for a massive bank. And then by this time when I'd gotten promoted, I was working in foreign currency. So I was working for the largest foreign currency provider, and they were headquartered in the UK. And of course, I was head of marketing for North America was my title. And I was the youngest VP in this company. So I was, 26, and I was head of marketing for the whole
That's huge.
country. Yeah, it was great. And I loved it. I mean, I just had such a passion for like consumer behavior and marketing and what made people tick and all that stuff. I was fascinated with it. And so, and I had a master's in it from university, and I don't know, I loved it. So I was like, yeah, I'm really serious about this. So I literally had a method. I would be like, okay, glass of wine, glass of water, glass of wine, glass of water, make sure I never get too tipsy. Sometimes because I was drinking with all these, 40-some-year-old men, and they all could drink so much more than me, I would literally feel like, okay, I'm getting tipsy. I would go to the bathroom to throw up the glass of wine so that I could keep drinking wine and just make sure I could keep up. And it was so interesting in hindsight, but I was like, it was just my brain being like, okay, this is a logical problem. I'm going to solve it, which is I don't want to be the girl dancing on the table or doing anything stupid because I'm doing this for my career, not against my career. So how can I fit alcohol in here? And then, it was interesting. I remember just little moments where I would come home, I'd get off the train, I'd go to my apartment, and I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go for a run. And I remember this one day I went into my apartment and I looked at the counter and there was a bottle of wine. And I was like, I could drink that or I could go for a run. They both probably do the same thing. And I just decided to open the bottle of wine. And, little things like that, where all the other things I was kind of doing for my mental health or for my health in general, or just to be happy, I just sort of slowly started replacing them with alcohol, just not even realizing it. I don't remember any line that I really ever crossed specifically. But then, really fast forward, I guess, a decade, we'd moved back to Colorado, but I was still working for the same company. I'd gotten promoted to global head of marketing. So I was spending half of my time in London, in the UK, and traveling all around the world, and then half my time in my home office. I had 2 little kids, and I was drinking like almost 2 bottles of wine every single night. And I wasn't even feeling it. I mean, I still wasn't I wasn't the person who people are like having an intervention with, or you have a problem. Like I was super together. But inside I was like, this doesn't feel right anymore. I can't even believe somebody can drink this much alcohol. This cannot be healthy for me. I did what most people would do. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to drink less. And so I started making myself these little rules like, okay, I'm not going to drink till Thursday, or I'm only going to drink 2 glasses at a time. And I could keep the rules, but if I kept them, I was mentally just like, oh, today sucks. I have to be the designated driver. It's not so much fun. What's the point of even going out if I'm not going to have a drink? Nah. Or I just wouldn't keep them and be like, well, forget it. I'll do that tomorrow. And so slowly but surely, I realized that like my attempts to cut back were not doing me any favors. In fact, interestingly, I can see now that my attempts to cut back actually had me drinking more. And I see now that was like really the forbidden fruit syndrome. It's very typical of how our brains work. You tell your brain you can't have something and it wants it more. But I didn't see that at the time. I was just completely dumbfounded. Like, why am I so smart and in control in all these areas of my life? But this is a big fat problem. And it wasn't a problem like I was in trouble at work or I was screwing anything up or, doing bad things, but it was internally a big problem. I had this huge battle going on of both wanting to drink more and less all at once. And just, I always talk about the fact that, we're so in tune with conflict externally, right? Like, so if somebody's fighting in the subway, I remember subway fights, and you're just like, oh my gosh, and you feel it, and your heart rate goes up, right?
It's terrifying when that happens.
Yeah, and then if you're fighting like with your partner and you're in your own house, it's even more intense. But we don't take into account that this fighting with ourselves, this both wanting to do more and less of something, and then beating ourselves up for it, it's really, really brutal on the human soul. Like it's really brutal, but we don't look at it because it's so typical. We just have resigned ourselves to this kind of, why didn't I work out? Why am I having a 3rd glass of wine? Why did I eat that last night? What's my problem? Why can't I do this? Like, it's just so normal. We've gotten really used to this internal conflict. And in my experience, that actually escalated my drinking, because when you are a drinker and you're using alcohol to relieve stress, then you're stressed because you're fighting with yourself and you're drinking more. And so something happened to me when I was coming back from the UK one day. It was really cool. It was very much like one of these moments of kind of divine, like, I don't know what's going on, but something in the universe is lining up right now to tell me this one thing. And I remember I was sitting in a train tunnel. I was super hungover. I had stayed up really late with colleagues at a work event in somebody's hotel room watching a football game, like till 3 a.m, ridiculously. And then I, gotten myself into the restaurant. I tried to order a mimosa because that was totally cool to drink at 6 a.m. in my mind. But she said, well, I'm not going to open the bottle of champagne because unless you're going to drink the whole bottle, it's going to go flat before anybody else wants one. And I was like, oh, no, I would never. No, I'm not going to drink the whole bottle. She said, but I can give you a screwdriver, which is vodka and orange juice. And like, I had these little like alarm bells, like, okay, vodka at 6 a.m. That's not something I'd done before. That's not a line I'd crossed. But I was like, okay, fine, just this once. And so I had a few of those. I got to the airport and I remember just sitting there thinking, I'm going home to my family, my 2 young boys and my husband, and I'm bringing them the worst of myself, and they really deserve the best of me. And I'd been asking myself for probably a year and a half, maybe even 2 years now, like, what's wrong with you? Like, do you have a problem? Are you an alcoholic? What is going on? And I take these tests and they tell me, no, I'm not an alcoholic. I even had a friend in AA and I talked to her about it. And she's like, yeah, but you're not an alcoholic. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm not like, I can't do that route or whatever. And so, but I had all this drama of this, my pervasive question was, what's wrong with me? And in this moment of really like inspiration, I just was struck with another question, which was why? Why is this different than it used to be? Why was it when I first started drinking, I could like look at the bill and be like, it's expensive. I don't want to do that anymore. Yet now, if I don't have a drink, I feel totally deprived and like I'm missing out. It's not that I could go without alcohol physically, but emotionally it was, upsetting. And so I was like, I'm going to just keep drinking. And I decided I'm going to stop trying to stop. I'm going to stop with any limits, with any restrictions. I'm going to get off this crazy train of, making promises and breaking promises. And I'm just going to figure out why. I'm going to answer that one question. I'm going to write a list of all the reasons I drink, and I'm going to try to understand what it does in my brain, what it does in my body. Why is it that all of a sudden I feel stuck? And that took me like 11 months. And I totally got off that like inner fighting thing. I just stopped. I put down the weapons, wasn't fighting with myself. I was just committed to the curiosity. And after like really learning, so many fascinating things, I remember coming out of my office and telling my husband, like, all right, if you want to drink with me again, tonight's the night, because after this, I think I'm done drinking. And he's like, what? And so we split a bottle of wine, and, that was really it. I drank one other time after that because I was really curious about, after I was separated from alcohol for a few months, what it really did. So I actually got out my iPhone, put it on a tripod and filmed myself getting drunk so I could actually experience like what alcohol felt like in my body when I wasn't drinking it regularly. And after that, I was like, geez, I just have no desire to drink it. And so I don't really say like I'm sober, I'm in recovery. I just basically say, I drink what I want whenever I want, but I just haven't wanted to drink in almost 5 years, over 5 years now, actually. And it's awesome.
So what did you just, I mean, you're like a scientist. This is like the way that you're approaching this is through trying to understand from, top to bottom and bottom to top why you're compelled to drink. So what did you find in those 11 months? So you just were like, fuck it, I'm drinking?
Yeah, for sure.
And were you like documenting your experiences? Did you have a journal? Did you have different checkpoints and tests set up?
Yeah,
How did you
totally.
approach this?
And that's what I did is I just replaced all of this shame and blame with curiosity. I was like, okay, curiosity is going to be my driving emotion, my driving thing. And so I would do all sorts of things. Like I would notice, okay, so I had a routine where I'd walk out of my office and I'd walk to the cabinet and I had my box of wine because I was no longer drinking bottles because, it made me feel all bad about myself if I drank more than one bottle. So I had my box so I could drink 2 bottles and not worry about it. So I have my box of wine. And I remember going, okay, right, I'm done working. How do I feel? I'm going to walk out there. How do I feel? I'm pouring my wine. How do I feel? And I realized that I felt better before I even took the sip. I was like, wow, it's literally like my body is decompressing. I feel this kind of giddy, like work's done, kind of like before I took the sip of wine. And then I started noticing that with other people. I would notice people, I remember being out to dinner in Paris one night and I was eating for the first time ever tartare. I just remember this. So I was like, I just have to try it. It was very strange. But anyway, this whole group of people came in and they were all kind of bummed and they're like, oh, after work, and they sit down and they start talking about ordering drinks, and their whole energy changed. And then they order the drinks and their whole energy changed. And they were happy and giddy and bubbly before the drinks even hit the table. I was like, that's weird. And so then that sent me down this whole rabbit hole of like researching the placebo effect and learning things like you can literally be touched with poison ivy, but if somebody who has credibility tells you it's not poison ivy, your skin won't break out most of the time. Like stuff like that. I was like, how is this even possible? This is crazy. And then one of the big reasons I was drinking at that stage was for stress. It was one of those like work hard, play hard. I'm going to be the one up all night doing whatever. And then I'm going to be in the office early in the morning. And so I started researching that and come to find out that, alcohol is fascinating. It is both a stimulant and a depressant. So it's one of the few substances like that. So basically it has this arc of how it's categorized. So when your blood alcohol content is rising, when you first have a drink, your blood alcohol content rises, your BAC, and as it's rising, you feel kind of those nice euphoric, kind of giddy, a little bit dizzy, loopy out of it, but nice feelings, right? And that lasts for about 20 to 30 minutes, according to the science. And then I did time it myself, and that was true for me as well. And that's when it's a stimulant. And then your body says, whoa, this is a toxin. We have to get this out of the body. The body actually stops doing all sorts of other stuff, like regulating your blood sugar or digesting your food in order to prioritize eliminating the alcohol because it is toxic to the body. And so as it starts leaving the body, it becomes a depressant. And so on that downward arc, you feel anxious and irritable and tired and just uneasy and, not quite comfortable in your own skin and all of these really not nice feelings as alcohol becomes a depressant. Now, the kicker is that 20 to 30 minutes for one drink is exchanged for 2 to 3 hours as your body eliminates that one drink. It takes your body much longer. But we never see this in our drinking cycle because what do? 20 minutes after your first drink, you have another drink.
So when you're drinking, let's say you're having multiple drinks, as one does, is each drink being processed within that cycle? Is it compounding with each drink you have? Does the cycle elongate? Like, does that 20 to 30 minutes become, an hour to an hour and a half if you have the proportionate amount of drinks? Or is it like always the 20 to 30 minutes and then it resets? Or how does it work?
Yeah, no, that's such a great question. And it's really interesting because one of the things that, now I help people because the accumulation of my story is basically that I did have tons of journals and I put them out on the internet and they went like, I just put a PDF out there and it got 20,000 downloads in 2 weeks. And I started getting letters from all over the world. And so I went on to take all my journals and put it into the book. And that's just been going crazy. So now I really help people who, were where I was. And so I've had people time this, right? And so I'll tell you their experiences and I'll tell you the science as well. So what happens is that actually that euphoric period shortens. And it shortens because your body is now balancing both the depressant and the stimulant. So the stimulant isn't as strong the second time around. So with that second time around, you'll still have a little bit of a euphoric period, but it will be shorter than the first 20 to 30 minutes. And then of course the depressant period, it elongates because now you are having to process twice as much. So actually the compounding gets worse, but you can keep that kind of euphoric bubble building. As we know, you can have 2 or 3 hours where you're kind of like, oh yeah, I'm still drinking. I'm trying to chase that high. I'm trying to chase that feeling. But what people have noticed when they start to really get curious about it and they write down their times and they actually do this. I had one woman recently and she handed me a piece of paper and she's like, okay, this is how it was for me. It was 21 minutes for the first drink. It was 16 minutes for the second drink. It was 13 minutes for the third drink. And then she didn't even feel it with the fourth drink. And the science confirms that where once your blood alcohol reaches a certain level, the euphoric feelings aren't there. That's where you get the angry, sad, weepy, crying, the drunk personality that just isn't nice. Being drunk actually doesn't feel very good to humans, but we don't often remember that it doesn't feel very good. And there's so much science behind why do we do this then in the first place? Well, one of the main reasons is because it overstimulates the pleasure center in our brain. And so we think, oh, well, that sounds great, right? Like, I love that idea. Of course, that's why we drink. We want to overstimulate the pleasure center. Well, the problem is that your brain is always trying to maintain homeostasis. So it actually turns down the level of stimulation with counter chemicals. And while it can't turn it down all the way, that is what gets us hooked, is that overstimulation. However, those counter chemicals, because they're not toxic to the body, they're produced by the body. One is called dynorphin. It doesn't actually leave the body at the same pace. So you have dynorphin left in your system. So you wake up the next morning, you have this combined feeling of, or for me, I was waking up, and most people report this, in the middle of the night, just with awful anxiety and kind of, what did I drink? But lots of like nervous energy. Like, it wasn't good energy, but I couldn't fall back asleep. I was just anxious and up and beating myself up. And it was this very intense moment in the middle of the night. Sometimes lasted like an hour. And what's happening is, not only is your body like processing the alcohol still, so you all still have all the depressant effects of the drink, but now you have this dynorphin that is present. So that means that just normal things that would elicit pleasure, like, I don't know, reading a book or meeting a friend or going to a concert, those are all normally pleasurable activities. When you're drinking a lot because you have the dynorphin, you aren't going to feel pleasure to the way you were before you were drinking. So actually, you need the drinks to bust through that level of dynorphin that's always in your system. I know this is getting super sciencey, so you feel free to stop me if you're like annoyed.
No, we love it. We love it.
But that is why you get so hooked, so it overstimulates your pleasure centers and it releases dopamine. And dopamine is the molecule that tells us that thing you just did, do that thing again, right? So dopamine gets released with sex, with food, with target practice. That's why first-person shooter video games are so addictive, because you hit the target just like we would need to do to survive with bow and arrow and a buffalo, say, and your brain gets a shot of dopamine. It gets a shot of dopamine scrolling your phone. It gets a shot of dopamine when your text, pops, stuff like that. But with alcohol and any addictive drug, that shot of dopamine is very high. It's artificially high levels of dopamine. And so your brain learns, your brain, by the way, and this is one of the things that I just have a little bit of a rant on, is that we have this perception that when you get addicted to something, something's wrong with you, the addict, right? You are the problem. You did something wrong. You made bad choices. You made bad decisions. The truth is, the scientific truth is that your brain is actually doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is doing exactly what it needs to do for your survival. It is saying, ooh, dopamine, that thing, imprint that, encode that, do that thing again. And it has learned that we need to continue to do that thing in order for our survival. And that thing just happens to be a drink. And then, of course, alcohol creates tolerance, because as your body, tolerance is really like an immunity. Your body's trying to build up a tolerance to it so that it isn't as impactful to the body. It's trying to learn how to purge it faster so you get less of the feeling. It's trying to learn how to deal with it. So it releases these counter chemicals. You build up this tolerance. And what do we do with tolerance? We drink more. We overstimulate the dopamine to a greater degree, and you can see how the cycle will continue. So we get tricked into, not tricked as much, but the brain does have really a learning error into doing something that actually isn't bringing us all that much pleasure. But because we've coupled it as a society with everything pleasurable, we have totally linked every single celebratory activity with alcohol, right? I mean, we've done the same thing with sugar and reward and celebration. What do you get when you're in second grade and you do a good job? You get a lollipop. What do you get on your birthday when you're turning 3? You get a cake, right? And so we link these very addictive substances with really traditionally pleasurable experiences. And then we just get confused too. So not only neurochemically are we confused, but like our own experience is like, well, I mean, my experience is like, it's not going to be fun if I can't have a drink, right? And now I can look back and I can sort of be like, oh, but being drunk at that concert was a lot like being drunk on my couch in front of Netflix, was a lot like being drunk at my friend's wedding. Like, actually being drunk feels the same. So I was actually having a very homogenous experience when I was drinking so much.
This is so interesting. Yeah, it's really fascinating, because I do think that, it's breaking through to curiosity when it comes to addiction is a feat in and of itself, because obviously, in a lot of recovery programs, the first step is sort of admitting. So even admitting to be curious about something is tough. You have to at least even acknowledge the fact that something is happening internally to be curious about. With all of the work that I do, I mean, astrology requires profound curiosity and questioning everything. And I tell this to my clients every time we're about to do a one-on-one reading, is that the session really is you dump all of your truths, all of the purses, flip them out, dump them out on the table. I'll come through with my astrological expertise, and we're basically going to play a game of match where, like, you tell me one truth and then we're going to see it reflected somewhere in your chart. And we're basically just, making these big cycles. But in order to even have the experience of like a really comprehensive deep dive in astrology, you have to be willing to just dump out your purses, and say what's really going on without judgment. I've been working on this. I've been sort of, I wrote about this in my book that I just wrote the manuscript for. But this concept of compassionate curiosity and being really kind to yourself through the process of maintaining this curiosity, and not to judge in a qualified, like, this is good or bad way, but to just simply be aware and to sort of be the doctor and the patient of yourself simultaneously, to have an active and participatory role. But I think that that's really hard because it acknowledges, the first step is like just being comfortable looking at your truth. And without looking at the truth, there's not really any way to begin a process of understanding what's happening to you. Have you seen that to be the case in your work as
Yeah,
well?
for sure. And I mean, like the question that really changed everything for me is like, why is this different? And inherent in that question is that something was different, that I was using alcohol in a way that I wasn't before, which was, of course, the truth that you want to run from for as long as you can, right? Like, I wanted to run from the fact that I didn't feel in control around alcohol. I wanted to run from the fact that I was using it to self-medicate. I wanted to run from the fact that I needed it in general, or felt like I needed it. And all of those things, by the way, I wanted to run from them because the societal norms and truths around that is that if that's true, if you are someone who is not drinking responsibly, who is using it to self-medicate, who needs a drink to just, get through the day, something is wrong with you. You are the thing that has gone wrong, right? And so because of that, and so in that moment, I had to admit that, like, yeah, these things have gone wrong, but B, get curious enough to say, well, did it go wrong because of me being wrong? Or did it go wrong because actually the substance is what's happening? And I didn't even have that question articulated or anything, but that was kind of part of it. But I had to be comfortable with, if it went wrong because of something I did, I had to be curious about that too. You can't be just curious for the answers you want. And I think that's really interesting. So, I mean, I almost made myself an agreement in that moment that, like, if my curiosity shows me that life really does suck without drinking, I'm going to just continue to drink, even if it kills me early. Like, that's the level of kind of surrender to the process of experimentation that I had. And what I take people through now, I call it the alcohol experiment for exactly that reason. Like, let's just get curious, because, and interestingly, and I love this fact, but recently, BJ Fogg, he's a PhD researcher at Stanford, and he's just published this book called Tiny Habits. And in his book, he talks about this decade-long research that he's done on, like, what makes a habit stick. And one of the main things that he talks through, which just is so logical and it makes so much sense, he said it's not the 21 days or the 66 days, or, those things are correlated with how much a habit will stick. But what is causal to what makes a habit stick is actually emotion, and it is positive emotion. And so if you feel good or positive around the habit itself, you are much more likely to do that. So if there's a way, and I think positive emotion, a lot of positive emotion gets a bad rap because of positive thinking, yada, yada, yada. But actually, a lot of positive emotion can just be removing the negative emotion. And so for me, if I look back at that moment, I was simultaneously removing negative emotion by deciding I was no longer going to beat myself up for my drinking, and removed a ton of negative emotion. But then I was getting curious. And if you think about curiosity, it is actually a truly positive emotion because there's possibility in curiosity. There's hope in curiosity. There's momentum in curiosity. There's energy in curiosity. And so we don't think of it like joy or fun, but it is a really positive emotion. And so I think that had a lot to do with why I was able to sustain that level of research, because the new habit I was trying on at that point was not drinking. It was researching, right? But I was really focused because everything I uncovered, let me off the hook, made me feel normal, made me feel like, wow, like this is so fascinating, and just continued to fuel the curiosity without me blaming myself. But yeah, that key transition, if anybody is stuck or struggling, if there is a way to make that transition from the self-blame and judgment just to being curious about why you're here in the first place, I mean, that's a huge, huge milestone.
So when does the sort of the study, so to speak, end? Because I could imagine myself who loves systems and also loves to like fuck with systems. I think that part of my intelligence is being able to understand systems really well, very quickly, and then learning how to get away with things. This was also, this is like a byproduct of like my childhood and my trauma and my parents' divorce and blah, 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 blah. But from a very young age, I was like, okay, the assignment calls for X, Y, and Z, and you get extra credit if you hand it in at this time, which means that if I hand it in at this time, even if I do a really shitty job on it, I could get the maximum score. So I don't like basically finding shortcuts constantly, um, which is, I think is definitely a skill of mine, but makes these types of things when it's like you have to then be honest with your work in a way harder for me, where like I could do this experiment, but who's to say when it stops, like I could do this experiment my whole life if I wanted to. So is there a time, and for you it was like, you had told your husband like this is going to be our last night of drinking because I think I'm done. Like how do you get to a point of realizing that you're done or that you can come up with some sort of a conclusion?
Yeah, I think for me and for a lot of people that I'm now seeing go through the same process, it is when the emotion changes. And when the emotion changes, the desire changes. So, um, and I feel like this has been true with almost everything I've tried to do in my life. Like if I've tried to force exercise and I just do it, and I can do it. I mean, I can make myself go to the gym for a certain amount of time, a certain amount of days. But then when I decided I was going to find something I really enjoyed doing and I got into martial arts and I love it, it it's not even an effort to continue to do exercise. It just happens. It's just part of who I am and what I do. And I think that the level of research that I did actually changed my desire for a drink. It was very hard when somebody would be like, "Oh, you're having a hard day, let me get you a bottle of wine." For me, and my drinking did slowly decline too, totally unintentionally. I mean, like without any effort. I wasn't even really noticing how much it was declining because I wasn't tracking it because I wasn't going to beat myself up about it. But when somebody would be like, "Hey, you're having a hard day, let me get you a bottle of wine," and I knew that actually that's going to give me 20 minutes of relief, and then it's going to make me more miserable. And actually, I'm going to be more miserable tomorrow, and then I'm going to have a hangover. Like I just didn't desire it anymore. And we're not tempted by things we don't desire. We're not triggered by things we don't desire. It's really easy not to drink a cup of motor oil because we don't think it tastes good and we don't see the point. And so when my desire changed, that and only then was I really like, yeah, I think I'm done with this. And it wasn't even there was no effort in it. There wasn't it was more like it would have been effort to continue to drink at that point. Like that's really how much understanding I had done. And aside from, the fact that alcohol does numb you, because it does, they used to use it as an anesthetic in surgeries. And so it literally will make you feel numb. Now they found things that are much less dangerous than using that much alcohol to numb a human in surgery, but it does numb you. It makes your brain sort of think slower. And it does have that 20 minutes of kind of that euphoric tipsy, like every other thing that I thought it was doing for me, it didn't do. So it wasn't like I was, whitewashing it and being like, no, it's the worst thing ever. It's absolutely no. I was like, no, it does do those things. Like it will. If I'm having a really bad day, I can drink enough to make myself unconscious. Like I can do that. Like I can drink enough to make myself pass out. But that didn't end up being worth it. Like I didn't want to do that anymore. So for me, and what I really try to teach people, and people are so impatient, like they really are so impatient to get to a point where their desire changes. And I think for two reasons. For one is we just don't believe it. When we want something, it's so hard to believe you don't want it. You know, that ex-boyfriend who you swear you were going to marry him and it was just going to be the thing, and now you don't even like what? But in that moment when your mom said there's other fish in the sea, like you can't even go there. So if someone says you might not actually want to drink, people just don't believe it. So they say, no, I'm going to have to effort here. I'm going to have to try. I know that alcohol is costing me, so I'm going to have to effort. And then I think we're just impatient for change too, because we actually want to feel better, feel healthier, whatever vanity reasons we want to stop drinking, lose the weight, look, clearer skin. So all of those things happen. And so people are really impatient. And I'm always like, no, just stay the course, just keep going through the information, because really the goal is that your desire shifts, because then it doesn't take any effort. You're not tempted. You don't have cravings. You're not living by a set of rules, and then getting mad at yourself when you break your rules.
I smoked cigarettes for almost 10 years, and it was such a, you know, I still drink alcohol. I drink alcohol very differently than I used to. My relationship has shifted very dramatically with alcohol, but it does oscillate. Um, right now, it was better in 2019 than it is today. Let's just say that. But with smoking, that was a scary thing to sort of watch my boundaries break year after year. I remember starting smoking in high school. Well, I really started at 13, but I would say like I got invested at 16. I remember thinking, I'm not going to smoke when I go to college. I'm going to a college in Minnesota. Nobody smokes there. This is a very New York high school thing to do. I got to college. It was true. Most people didn't smoke. I found the smokers. Then I was like, I'm going to quit when I graduate. And then I didn't. And then I was going to quit when I turned 25. And then I didn't. And then it was like I was getting closer to 30 and it was like, "Oh my God, am I ever going to quit? Like, actually, is this not happening anymore? Is this over? This idea that I'm not going to be a smoker?" And it was only in meeting my current partner who could not stand alcohol. Speaking of Sex and the City, it was very Aiden, or I'm sorry, cigarettes. Who it was like a very Aiden situation where he like was just absolutely anti-smoking, that I allowed myself to start testing, how long could I go without a cigarette? And it was it started as just a test. Like we went on our first vacation together. I obviously wasn't going to smoke during that. So that was like the first, 10 days that I didn't have a cigarette and who knows how long. And then I told him when we got back, I was like, okay, I'll do this for another month, but I'm going to smoke in October. And he was like not happy about it, but agreed. And then October came and I was like, okay, I went all this time, I'll do another month. And it literally just had to be incremental. And finally, the first time I did have a cigarette after that, it had been so long that I had one and it just sucked and I couldn't even finish it and it tasted horrible. And there was something really heartbreaking about it because so much of my identity had been embedded in smoking and like wanting to smoke and loving smoking and never wanting to give up cigarettes, but really wanting to give up cigarettes. And that exactly that like push and pull that you were describing. And then when I had this cigarette and it was so uninspiring and it tasted so bad and it just made me feel like I had already been participating in that space without smoking. And then I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'll have one. I've gone like 5 months and realized that I had participated already in the space. I had done all the things. I had hung out with smokers. I like could do it all without a cigarette. Bringing that cigarette did not enhance my experience at all. I was having I was having more fun before I had had the cigarette. And then I felt shitty and I had to drink all this water and I was like, get this out of my mouth. So that was a really eye opening experience for me because it was something that it was a very hard addiction to break. But through being curious about it and through sort of taking the pressure off holistically and working in much smaller bite sized pieces, it was so much easier for me to um, actually then compound that experience to no longer be a smoker anymore. It's heartbreaking, these cycles. It's so emotional, so much comes up. It really is about it's so trite sounding because there's so many practices of mindfulness, and we start to associate that with like whatever boring, but it really is about staying in the moment and like being super conscious every moment of the, present every moment, where you are making a choice every moment rather than just feeling like you have to submit to a narrative.
Yeah, and I think the key to that is allowing those choices to be, not to be negative if you, because so much of like, okay, if positive emotion is one of the keys here, so much of that is just removing the negative, because what you were doing in your cigarette smoking experience, you were really like, I can if I want to, I'm just going to try this. I can if I want to, I'm just going to try this. But I think when people normally go about something like, I can never drink again, I have to stop this forever. And then you've put this line in the sand that chances of you keeping that commitment are very slim. And by the way, when you break it, you're going to beat yourself up. And I think alcohol is something that literally blows my mind. I mean, I don't understand. There's nothing else that I can think of where 100% is success and 99.9% is failure, like in terms of, oh, you're not sober if you have a drink, and I'm like, what is that all about? Like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, because we don't measure other things like that. We
That's so
measure
true.
things on, what percentage have you reduced or, like progress. We measure progress almost everywhere else. But here we're like ruthless. And I think it keeps so many people stuck in that negative emotion and therefore stuck drinking because we don't look at having a drink as, we look at it as like, oh, well, that's a relapse, and now you're, I mean, it's so tied up in just nasty stuff. And I think when you can come at it like, you know what, I'm just going to try this. I'm going to see how it goes. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If it does work, it does work. But you have to, kind of have the courage to be like, I'm going to find my own path in this, no matter what that means. Like, if that means that, like for me, that I keep drinking because I've convinced myself that yes, drinking is adding tons of stuff to my life that I would be missing out without, then I'm going to keep drinking. Like, and I was firm on that commitment, but I also was firm on, if I find that like alcohol is not doing anything for me, then I'm going to be okay letting it go. And so I think that though, because we just fall into these paradigms of society is like, well, you do anything and then I remember reading something, I forget who it was. It might've been Byron Katie. And she basically hadn't had a cigarette for like 10 years or something. And then she was in a taxi cab in Paris and the driver passed her a cigarette and she was like, sure. And she had a cigarette and like in everybody's book, it's like, oh my gosh. And it's like, so I had a cigarette, like it was no big deal. And then now I don't want it anymore. And I think that level of just, really figuring out what you want instead of what you think you should want in every moment. But being really aware at the same time, it's a tension, like most good things in life, it's a tension.
Yeah. And also another Carrie Bradshaw experience because she also went to Paris and
well, maybe that's who that was then. Maybe I've gotten
So, where can we find you now and how have you synthesized this into your work?
So I wrote a book, it's called This Naked Mind. And then a few years after the book came out, I wrote another book called The Alcohol Experiment. And I actually created kind of an online experience, which is free. You could go to alcoholexperiment.com. And it's just basically for people who are like, you know what, I'm curious. I don't know what that means for me. I don't know if that means I want to stop or I just want to cut back or maybe nothing. I'm just curious. And every day you get a video and an email. And it's just kind of a mindset shift. Some of the information that I shared today, just going more in detail with all of it. Not scary. I don't think fear things work, because it doesn't keep us changing. I think it really is about towards pleasure rather than away from pain in the long term. But yeah, alcoholexperiment.com if anybody wants to try that experiment.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. It's so lovely connecting with you. And I'm going to be hitting you up for all of your poison ivy tips moving forward.
So good.
Because even though I spent my time in Minnesota, I am definitely not equipped for nature. Thank you so much.
Are you ready for a deep dive and truly lasting change? If so, you might consider my intensive program. It's a 9-week self-led program that you can do in the complete comfort of your own home, and it will truly transform your relationship with alcohol. If you want to learn more about this, go to thisnakedmind.com/intensive. And as always, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast as it truly helps the message reach somebody who might need to hear it today.